What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a few new things that we're going to be discussing with you today. The latest Climate Prediction Center maps and charts are now out, so we're going to be talking about those. We're also going to be discussing the Madden-Julian oscillation, as we've seen multiple indicators that we could see an active MJO in Africa and the North Atlantic. So we have some exciting toys that we're going to be talking and looking at today. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it right here. Starting off, this is our latest outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Right here, this is valid from the 17th to the 23rd and from the 24th to the 30th of September. So we're going to go ahead and discuss both of these. First, the indicator that I'm looking at, both favoring Central American gyre development right here. Here in the Western Atlantic, especially around the Gulf region and in the Northwestern Caribbean. So we're going to want to watch out for that as well. That's the main thing that we are going to want to pay attention to, especially down the line. The MDR doesn't look like it's going to be as active as we get towards later in September and early in October based on these charts, but we'll talk more about that in just a second. But ultimately, the main threat now turns towards the Western Caribbean and the Gulf region, because what we're noticing on week 2 is you're noticing a pretty big increase in terms of your Central American gyre setup over here, especially from the 17th to the 23rd. And based on where this is at, the kind of area of origin definitely does align to where that gyre is. And there are two distinct areas in the Atlantic where gyre systems can develop. The first one is in the Northwestern Caribbean, and the second one is in the Bay of Campeche. And as I've talked about before, the systems that originate in the Caribbean are definitely more likely as they kind of start to organize and develop and kind of detach from the generally broad low-pressure system that the gyre provides over Central America. And generally what you see is kind of something like this. You have a low-pressure system starting to get its act together. You have a lot of convection. It detaches off the coast of Honduras. It becomes its own tropical wave. It starts to organize and then develops and then starts to intensify at a very quick rate and then heads potentially towards the Yucatan Peninsula or the Gulf Coast or even Cuba in some instances as well. Not saying that's going to happen this time around, but that's usually the most likely scenario and the most likely threat we typically see with gyre systems right there. So that's something to watch out for in that portion. Another thing to pay attention to, too, is, and although it is a bit more rare, the stuff that originates in the Western Gulf and in the Bay of Campeche, because it does happen actually quite a few times, and those definitely can be very nasty systems. For example, Hurricane Milton originated off the gyre in the Western Gulf region over there, and then just started explosively intensifying to Category 5, and then it head towards Florida as a Category 3 and made landfall over there, and that's kind of what ultimately happened in that sake. So you're definitely seeing an increase in the gyre development in the Atlantic. But one thing I do need to note for you guys right here is this greater than 60% probability of development happening on the Eastern Pacific. We're going to have to absolutely watch that, because if something does develop there and the EPC is very adamant that that's going to happen, or at least it's likely to happen over there, we're going to want to watch, number 1, where it originates, number 2, where it tracks, and number 3, how strong it gets. Because if we do see a system that originates too far to the east and starts to ultimately build a lot of outflow, that can generate some wind shear that impacts parts of the Atlantic side of things in the Caribbean and the Gulf, and kind of shuts down tropical development for that region over there. If it starts to take its time organizing and developing and kind of moves a bit further towards the west, kind of, I would say kind of around the line of the Gulf of Tehuantepec, or even west of the Gulf of Tehuantepec over here, that's when you would start to get a little bit more, be a little bit more lenient with that, because the outflow wouldn't generate as much, it wouldn't be affecting as much area in the Atlantic, it wouldn't be seeing as much shear in there as well. So those are all factors that you're going to want to watch out for as well. But if we do see development in the Eastern Pacific, we're going to want to watch and see how big it is, how organized it is, how quickly it strengthens, and how that ultimately will pan out, because that will play a big role as to what will happen in the Central American gyre on the Atlantic side of things. But another thing that hasn't really slowed down just quite yet for next week is what's happening in the main development region. Cabo Verde Islands, you are in that 40% area of tropical development right there, and I've said this once and I will say it again. If the Climate Prediction Center is highlighting that area, especially if it's over 20%, than what we've noticed previously, especially in the main development region, you're going to want to pay attention to that, because CPC is definitely favoring some tropical development over there for you guys over there in the MDR and in parts of the Atlantic as well that we're absolutely going to want to pay attention to. This is more of a long-term threat, I will say, but a threat nonetheless that we're going to have to watch out for and keep a very close eye on down the line. And also another threat we're going to want to watch for down the line is more gyre development potentially happening in week 3 from the 24th to the 30th of September. And in my opinion, this would be a much more favorable area of a chance for development for one distinct reason. You're not seeing this greater than 60% area of development happening in parts of the Eastern Pacific right here that could generate enough shear to kind of shut it down for a little while. In my opinion, that would be a much greater time where things could start acting up and things could really start to turn up in that part of the region as well. And another thing to consider as well, this was around the time frame that Hurricane Helene got its act together around last year. So that's kind of more in the climatological norm of things. Typically, Central American gyre systems start to organize and get their act together, I'd say around mid to late September, going into October. That's when they especially become a threat. Hurricane Michael is an infamous example of that as well. But ultimately, things start to get interesting over there down the line, and this season is definitely not over yet. In fact, in my opinion, it's probably not even quite started just yet because of that Central American gyre threat. And the reason I say that is not because I think it's going to be this explosive hurricane season down the line. The reason I say that is because of the threat to people that this poses. Aaron, we got lucky with that there wasn't more damage than there was outside of parts of the Antilles, the Bahamas, and the Carolinas and Bermuda. We got lucky with Aaron. With this area in the Central American gyre, it's kind of you're going to want to watch on all sides what's happening, because that's something that you're going to have to pay attention to. And once again, we'll have to watch and see how these models ultimately show this system going. But one key indicator I'm watching is this massive drop in development in parts of the Eastern Pacific over here. That is definitely going to be more conducive, at least from what I've seen, for Central American gyre development, especially around late September. So we're going to want to watch out for that, especially if you are in Central America, if you're in the Yucatan Peninsula, if you are tuning in from Cuba, Jamaica, and even along the Gulf Coast, you're going to want to watch out for this as well. And then that's just because, honestly, looking at that chart and looking at that map, that shows, in my opinion, more of a primed area for tropical development down the line. MDR, things start to decrease a little bit. I wouldn't be too worried about it this time around. This is 20% just for the fact that it's probably 20%. But once again, if the CPC is tagging something, you're going to want to pay attention to it, and we'll keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. One thing I do want to look at is kind of what we're looking at in general in terms of what's the moisture going to look like, and what's the kind of the global tropics that we're seeing with this right here. Let me see if we can kind of let me see if I can pull this up. Yep, there we go. So here's your Atlantic side of it right here. Let me see if I can move my camera over a little bit to show you this. But here's what we have for the Atlantic side. With the exception of maybe some dryness in parts of the extreme southern Atlantic that doesn't favor tropical development near the equator, you're looking at a more moist than average tropics, especially in parts of the MDR and in parts of the Gulf region as well. And that's not just a one-time thing. That continues throughout the rest of that time frame, by the end of September. So that's also a key indicator that, okay, it may be quiet now, but things are starting to ramp up very shortly, and we're absolutely going to want to pay attention to that. So that's just another thing and another factor that we're going to want to watch out for as well, and that's something that we're going to want to keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But another thing I wanted to go ahead and show you is the Madden-Julian oscillation, or MJO for short. What essentially, in layman's terms, what the MJO is, it's basically, is there a kind of a pattern that favors more divergence towards the surface? More convergence towards the surface, more divergence aloft. I apologize for messing that up very quickly. But ultimately, what we're looking at with this is just for layman's terms. How much more favorable could tropical development be, and how much more convection could we see that could kind of initiate this? Because we do have some stable air in the Atlantic that we're watching. The question is, will the MJO kind of break that stable air cycle? And so a lot of indicators do say yes, it will, but we're going to want to pay attention to it because kind of what we're seeing is at least this CFS, we'll start it off with this right here. Where we're currently at is around a very weak MJO in the Indian Ocean, but it is expected to really just travel all across much of the globe right here and kind of emerge near the Western and Eastern Pacific. And then at least to some extent affect parts of the Atlantic and Africa right here. And that could generally be a problem down the line because if you're seeing, especially if it's kind of heads towards the Eastern Pacific like this indicator is right here, because what that would do is that would enhance the Central American gyre. And what that would do is produce a lot more convection. That would produce a lot. That would kind of help the low pressure system, the broad low pressure system, kind of tighten up a little bit more and generate more convergence and divergence aloft to allow for more convection to happen, and things would start to not go so well in that area as well. So we're going to want to watch out for that. Here's what we have for that. Here's the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. They really want this to surge and head towards the Atlantic. It's going to be a period for at least, I think, about a week or so, but that week is definitely an area that you're going to want to pay attention to. And that starts, I believe, on the 14th, the night of the 14th going into the 15th, according to this, until the 22nd. So you have a period of about 7 days where the MJO, according to this forecast, will be over parts of the Atlantic, and especially if it's aligned near the gyre, that would be a very big concern for mine. That's also why I think the Climate Prediction Center is putting a greater than 60% risk in parts of the Eastern Pacific, because they're looking at this and they're going, okay, we're looking at a little bit more of an MJO favorable environment. We're going to want to pay attention to that as well, because that's going to generate more convection. So that's what we have for you right here. European even starting to pick up on this a little bit, really wanting this to travel and just whip over here. And by the time we get to the 16th of September and starting to kind of originate over there and lasts about at least a week, according to what I'm seeing right here. Same with the European, with the ECCM showing a similar situation as well. Definitely a more of a favorable MJO setup than what we've seen previously. And I think we could see a scenario where maybe tropical development takes advantage of that time window that we're seeing right here and really starts to ramp up. Now, I know I went through a lot of technical stuff, and you're probably wondering, Patrick, we don't understand half of this that you're talking about. What does this mean for tropical development? A stronger MJO is typically indicative, especially in this time of the hurricane season, more favorable for tropical development. And especially the placement of it, where at least according to the charts I'm seeing, and at least according to how that aligns geographically, more so leans towards the Central American gyre, really starts to concern me with this. Because let me go ahead and show you an illustration with this. You have your MJO that kind of moves for pretty much from west to east. And ultimately, if it moves towards the east and starts to kind of pick up in parts in the Eastern Pacific and in parts of the Western Atlantic as well, that's going to really enhance your Central American gyre setup right there. And all this convection that you're seeing right here already, you definitely see a lot more of it because the increased divergence aloft and increased convergence down the surface. Because what air needs is forcing. It needs forcing to generate convection, and convergence at the surface is kind of pushes it up like this, and then divergence aloft helps it go like this to kind of cause some outflow and helps generate that forcing needed for convection. That's Met 103 for you guys right there typically. So that's just another thing I want to highlight for you guys. But ultimately, what this all hones down to is, okay, the MJO is definitely going to be ramping up a bit more. You're definitely going to see a more of an uptick instead of maybe the main development region, maybe towards the Western Atlantic. And I would say over the next 10 days, you're absolutely going to want to watch that area and see how things start to evolve. Yes, we can look at model runs all day and night and all of that stuff, but after a while, it does get a little bit old, I'll admit, right there. So that's why I kind of wanted to make this a little bit different of a video. Instead of going through a lot of the models, I wanted to go through kind of the basics as well as the Climate Prediction Center and then kind of look at the conditions for you guys. So that's what we're looking at. Generally right there, and I hope this gives you an idea of why I'm looking at this and why I'm paying attention to this. Yes, things are a little bit more technical than I'm a little more technical than I usually am, but I wanted to kind of go through everything and kind of go through a lot more than I usually do in my videos, just to kind of give you an idea of why is this kid still talking about hurricane season? Nothing's happening. So I hope that helps a little bit. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get to conditions, because the conditions do start to concern me a little bit, especially down around where that MJO starts to ramp up. Starting off with your sea surface temperatures, here's the situation that we have for you. At least in terms of what's going on in the Western Atlantic, there's really no debate about this. The Central American waters and the waters in the Gulf are very hot. You're looking at 30 to 31 degrees Celsius water temperatures in that region right there. That anything that has a decent environment is going to take off in those water temperatures. And that's why I'm highlighting that gyre threat especially in this video, because definitely the potential energy for this is there. The question is, what is the trigger? And what we're looking at is we're looking at the water temperatures. Also, we need to look at the ocean heat content as well. OHC continues to be really concerning. Look at this. Northwestern Caribbean, 175 plus OHC. I'm actually going to see if on Yoshi's website I can go ahead and look at the SST, if I can look at OHC maps for parts of that region right there. See if I can pull something up. Unfortunately, no, I can't, because they're all very outdated. But you can look at this right here, and ultimately 175 plus OHC. For those of you who do not know what ocean heat content is, it's basically how warm the water is and how deep down those waters go. So if you see a kind of like an OHC map of maybe like 50 or 75, it's basically how warm those water temperatures are, and maybe the depth of that of those water temps is like 20 to 30 meters or so. This is significantly deeper in parts of the Northwestern Caribbean, and also a reason I'm highlighting the Central American gyre threat, because any system that develops off the gyre maybe takes its time to move and organize and develop, goes over that OHC, rapidly intensifies. Not only is that going to make the system extremely strong, but it's also going to allow for a scenario where where kind of the waters remain relatively untapped, and another tropical wave can develop and kind of take more of that OHC as well. So what you have in this scenario is a powder keg, and the Central American gyre is basically like like the cigarette lighter smoking up an arsenal right there. A single spark that goes wrong could definitely ignite all that energy right there, all that potential energy, and cause some problems over there. And that's why when I look at the Climate Prediction Center, I look at all the indicators I'm looking at, I go, okay, this is a bit concerning for me. We need to talk about this. And I'll show you more things in the next few days to kind of show you why I'm more worried about this and why I'm highlighting this now. Because at this point, we're not looking at any initial development other than what the CPC is showing with that's more long run. But I'm looking at the conditions, and I'm kind of explaining to you, this is why we need to watch out for this. This has a legitimate probability for it to go off, and we're going to want to pay attention to it in the coming days here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. Thanks for bearing with me that long. I know we didn't get to see some of the fun stuff I normally show with the models and all of that, but if you guys do like this kind of format where I go over the conditions and go over more technical stuff, let me know in the comments down below. I'd really appreciate your feedback on that. But with that being said, leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, will be to get more people engaged with weather. If you'd like to help us out, hang out with us, or ask us some questions generally, we'd be happy to take a lot of questions and help you learn. Feel free to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. I'd really hope you join. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.